Hi, I'm Valerie Engelhart, and in this video I am going to be painting a white turkey. So if you live in the United States, obviously right around this time is Thanksgiving, in which there is a lot of turkey. So much turkey. And you know what? I'm not doing turkey. My husband makes homemade pizza from scratch for Thanksgiving, so no turkey for me, so I'm gonna paint it. Also, my daughter wanted me to paint a turkey, so I can't ignore a request from my beloved little girl. Unless it is something I really don't want to do. But this is something I've never done before, and I haven't painted a bird in a while, so I figured why not? And if you have seen my pears video lately, this was done with the same motivation of I had the insatiable need to paint something, but just could not bring myself to do any real prep work. So I grabbed whatever I had available. I found a reference photo on Splash of a turkey, and you can see that over on the left-hand side. I grabbed a student grade watercolor paper of Fabriano 1264, and I just grabbed a palette that I keep on my desk. Now this particular palette I put together mostly with shades of color that I read in a book about painting people. But the colors on the turkey, that bold red, that light blue, I recognized as having similar colors in this palette, which is why I grabbed it. But these aren't colors I typically use, so that was another exercise for me, was being very bold. This is a primary painting. And so size 8 brush, it is my go-to workhorse. And, well, I started with the beak, put on that, what is that, a wattle? And then I've started to work up around the head. I love that beautiful blue color. So the blue I used is Daniel Smith Manganese Blue Hue, and I'm pretty sure all of the colors, taking a look at my palette, yeah, all those colors are by Daniel Smith. But right now, I am painting loosely, and as always, no sketch, just straight in, paint to paper, paying attention to proportions and angles, and oftentimes, if you've been on my channel for a while, I will make a reference image in black and white and reduce the values. In this, speed was of the essence for my motivation. And plus, it's good to practice seeing values in color and using my own brain to isolate values. And I also want to show that you don't have to do all the stuff I do. But right now I've pulled out some kosher salt and I'm sprinkling it on a part of the turkey head. And I'm doing that because even though that reference photo isn't super big, there's a lot of texture, like these little bumps. And so I decided to try and replicate those bumps using salt. Now, if I were doing a very serious painting, I might have wanted to use, there's a Golden makes like these really cool mediums. I usually see them used with acrylic painting, but using them in watercolor too, I mean, why not? It's like these little glass beads, and I think those would have made a fantastic texture on that part of the turkey head. Now back to the rest of the wattle, I like how there's that strong contrast, that like just pack of red against the white of the turkey. And I'm using a mix. And when I say mix, I don't mean I'm mixing the colors together, I am placing them next to each other and letting them merge naturally wet into wet. The cooler red is permanent alizarin crimson, and the warmer red is a cadmium red medium hue. Now, my cadmium colors are hue. They have hue in the name because it's supposed to be safer than like actual cadmium paint. But I think it's still a little toxic. So I'm just going to use this moment to say, whether your paints are toxic or not, don't put them in your mouth. Now you might think, Val, why would you have to tell me something like that? I'm an adult. Well, dear viewer, I too am an adult who puts paintbrushes in her mouth. And there was a time when paint ended up on the end of my handle. I shoved the paintbrush in my mouth so that I could use both my hands without putting the brush down, and got a tongueful of paint and learned from my fail, it does not taste as nice as it looks. So my paper is still wet, and I'm going in and dropping in some of that cadmium red, and I'm doing it pretty thick. Now, I am working from a palette instead of fresh paint, but because the water has been sitting in that pan for a little while, it's easy to pick up a pretty thick pigment, and I'm able to get little dots by using just the tip of my brush. I also want to call out that I have sped this up just a touch to 150%. Now, I want to use my cling film to create some of that texture on the wattle. However, this painting was drying a lot faster than I was anticipating, so I didn't get a lot of the marks that I wanted, and I figured I would just try anyway. And then I put that salt container on top for two reasons. One, to keep the rest of that cling film out of my way so I can keep painting, and then the other is to strengthen the marks of the cling film. I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but something about using salt and cling film for texture is you have to let the painting dry naturally. So if you, like me, have the need for speed and painting something in about 30 minutes and calling it quits, those techniques might not be the best ones to deploy. Now we're getting into a part that's a little difficult to do in that, one, I struggle with feathers. That's one of the reasons I don't paint birds a lot, is I don't want to paint feathers. And oftentimes I can get away with it, but this is a white turkey on a white background. And so in order to give that lovely textural interest that we see in the reference photo, I'm gonna have to at least pretend to paint some feathers. And so what I'm doing is I am painting the shadows that I see, and I'm using a lot of the yellow ochre. And I'm doing that because my reference photo, when I'm looking at it, those shadows look very warm. And I also, because this is a white turkey, I want to keep even those darkest values fairly light when compared to the head of the turkey. But I don't want it to be just a monotonous yellow ochre, so I do go through and drop in other colors, such as the manganese blue hue. And the other important thing is my brush strokes. I am keeping them curved. If you look at my reference photo, see how those feathers have they're almost straight. There's a slight curve to them, especially as they go around the turkey's body. That is what I am trying to illustrate. Now, my dear viewer, I actually did get some decent marks on that wattle, but I have to make a confession, because I really did want to finish this painting in just half an hour and not come back to it. This painting is really just meant to play around and to try something new and to see if I like it, to see if I ever want to do another turkey. But that meant I was impatient, and I realized the error of my impatient ways and decided to prematurely take off the cling film and then just blast with the hairdryer. But I did still get some interesting marks, so there you go. Those marks would have been far more pronounced had I let it dry naturally, but mama ain't got time for that. So to get some of these darker values in that nostril and the eye, I am using a mixture of French ultramarine and burnt sienna, though I am leaning more ultramarine to give it more of a blue look. But if you are someone who likes to mix your paints, the burnt sienna and French ultramarine make fantastic gray colors. And of course, you can make them warmer or cooler based on how much of the burnt sienna or French ultramarine you use. And French ultramarine is granulating, so one thing that happens as I'm painting the eye, I am bleeding some of that eye into the bird, just so that it's not just this as if I used a sticker and stuck it on. But at the end, there's this lovely granulated tear mark, and that wasn't something I planned, it just happened. And I love that. And then to get the eye to have that rounded, glassy look, I used a clean, damp brush and did a little swooping U motion, and nothing else. And because that area was painted before, I didn't leave it completely white. Some of the red is showing through in that shine of the eye, which is fantastic because it would be reflecting the colors around it, and there's a lot of red in that area anyway. And so that is a way for me to reflect that color without having to try and add it in. It just looks more natural. So now I'm going in with some permanent alizarin crimson, that cool dark red, and I am painting in negatively some of those folds on the wattle. And then taking some of that ultramarine mixture to accentuate some of those folds on the head. Now I will go ahead and say that for a 30-minute turkey painting done on a whim, I'm actually pretty pleased with how it ends up. But if I were to do this again, if I were to have a serious sit-down painting session of this or any other turkey, I would probably paint this. If I were going to keep a white background, I would try to abstract this further. I would try to make it very loose and almost like an illusion of a turkey. That's pretty deep for a turkey, but we're gonna keep rolling with it. I don't mean the color, I mean the concept. But I think what I would actually want to do is do one of those watercolor washes where I cover the paper in a lot of color and texture and then paint the turkey on top of it using the marks that have already been created. And then if I decide to do a white turkey again, I would get my white by using gouache, or I'd probably go for using watercolor ground to create the texture of the white feathers of the turkey. So if you're interested to see how I would do that, how would I paint a white watercolor turkey on a background with a full watercolor wash, let me know in the comments. That would convince me to do this. I easily cave to peer pressure. All right, I want to accentuate more of those feathers, so I have used that gray mixture, which is predominantly French ultramarine, to illustrate some of these feathers. And I'm using it in different concentrations of paint, so again, different values. I want there to be that cool dark tone, but I want it to stay watery. If I make it too dark, it's not going to translate that the feathers are white. And I don't want to lose that. That's part of what makes this turkey interesting. So there's a lot of back and forth, looking at my reference photo and making sure that the marks that I'm making actually mimic what I see. Paint what you see, not what you think you see. At least if you're going for a bit of realism. I say looking at a turkey that is incredibly loose and is not realistic, but I use realistic proportions in my work. So my advice still stands. Now, one thing that's nice about the Fabriano 1264 student grade paper is that paint lifts very easily off of it. That could also be a detriment, but in my case, I do like that lifting ability because if there's anywhere on this turkey that I don't really like or want to loosen up, all I have to do is go and scrub it a little bit with my brush and the paint lifts off. You want to be careful about doing that too much because even if you manage to scrub the area, if you keep doing it, even if there isn't clear quote unquote mud, there'll just be some quality about it. Because this paper isn't 100% cotton, like it'll start to pill a little bit, get those little balls. So it's a good quality if you know how to use it properly. And the only way you'll learn how is by giving it a try. Putting a little more detail into that wattle, and then softening some of those shadows because I don't want that. There's already this big block of red in the middle of my paper, and I don't want all of those hard edges. So just softening a little bit, having it merge into the feathers, and then creating that line at the top of the beak to separate the wattle from the beak. The further I get away from my turkey, the looser and more watery my brush strokes get. Look at where I'm holding that brush at the very end. I want things to be loose. And a great way to paint loosely is to hold that brush at the back. All right, so at this point I was feeling a little, deflated. So I usually don't do gouache until the very end, but I decided to pull it out now because I was like, I need to see this turkey with the gouache before I decide how much more effort I want to put into this. And it's a little difficult to see in the reference photo, but there's all these little white hairs coming off. And you don't have to do this, especially with this being a loose painting, but that quality was so unique that I felt like I had to put it in. I felt compelled, going to obey the turkey. And then there are those little marks on the neck part of the wattle, but they are fewer and more spread out. And just putting it on that area on top of the beak without putting it in other places, it just wouldn't have been good for me. But I'm trying to be careful not to put it everywhere and making it too tight, because if everything gets way too detailed, then just having a very detailed area and then like a loose, practically abstract area, it wouldn't connect. And so there is that dance to be had between making sure there's enough detail, but making sure there isn't too much detail. But I really do like how just adding a little bit of gouache in some areas does bring more life to the piece. It made me much happier with it. Alright, so I decided to pull out my synthetic, fairly wide flat brush. Notice how the hairs on that brush are splayed. It is not a very good quality brush, and that doesn't mean it's not useful. It means use it for how it is, not what you want it to be. That was kind of stupid, because what I want it to be is what it is right now. But when I did buy it, I did want it to be a little more consistent. Work with me here, people, work with me. If one of your brushes gets all janky, find a use for the jank. And in this case, it makes what can make good feather textures. Or at least I wanted to try and see if I could get some decent feather textures, especially because this turkey, the end of the feathers, do have a little bit of a square, flattened quality. And I needed more visual texture throughout the feathers of the bird, because I've got so much of that visual interest on the neck, and there was like very little going on with the body. And now I'm going through and I've basically got like dirty water with just the hint of blue to put in some areas, because it's a white bird, and so I want some of these shadows I put in to be incredibly light in value but still exist. But it's also making me realize, because I'm looking at my turkey painting in real life right now, it's on my desk. Wow, things can really look different between camera and what you actually have, and I'm calling that out. For if you are using similar materials to me and you're like, oh, why isn't this turning out like hers? Maybe it is. And there's just a difference from video to real life, RGB to CMYK. But at that point, I was happy. I put the brush down, and here's the finished painting. So if you liked this video, press that like button so I know to make more like this, and if you want to see more, subscribe, because I make videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!